Trump is threatening to apply tariffs to basically the entire world. If anyone chooses to not do what is good for the United States, then they should expect to see tariffs on the horizon. Is this realistic? Why would the rest of the world care to act in the interests of the United States? Does the rest of the world need access to the U.S. market? Why wouldn't they act in their own interests instead? Do tariffs work in everyone's interest? Will applying tariffs work at all? First, let's understand what it means to tariff others. In the West, we used to apply a tariff against another country in what was called a trade war. Countries could do this when they manufactured things and traded them with each other. If you felt the trade was unfair in a particular sector or on trade in a particular commodity, you could apply a charge on those goods as a punishment. This form of punishment was to be used as a lever towards negotiations on the trade within that sector or on that resource. Trade, like a contract between individuals, must be mutually beneficial for it to be valid. This is what is called consideration. The terms must have mutually acceptable and beneficial consideration to be valid. If not, then the trade war would likely continue, or other trade partners would be found. This was possible when many nations had production lines and manufacturing of their own. The application of tariffs was basically done away with due to globalization of the economy, along with agreements such as GATT and NAFTA. Through globalization, we saw the West was basically gutted of manufacturing, as this was in large part farmed out to China and the rest of Southeast Asia. Tech, to some degree, has been an export from India. Tech is also a key ingredient in the economy and politics of Israel. When you look at the items on the store shelves in the West, most items are foreign-made or materials foreign-sourced and assembled or finished in the West. Throughout this time period, we also saw the demise of Western automobile manufacturing. The best stuff came from Japan, as Marty told Doc in Back to the Future. And then some of the best stuff came from South Korea. And now most things come from China. So who stood to benefit from all of this? Well, it wasn't the average worker in the West. The West became a consumer economy in large part, giving low-paying service sector jobs. So many people wanted a government job to get better pay, and so the government expanded and became an unaccountable money pit in many ways. The beneficiary of globalization was big finance, in other words, Wall Street, banking, and those who had spare money to put into the stock market for a gamble. The only real growth in the West has been in big technology and weapons and war-making sectors, which it would seem are now poised to convert our Western societies into total and complete surveillance states. So as you can see, the world of tariffs existed 45 and more years ago. The world was a much different place back then in comparison to what it is today. In the West, we still had no real manufacturing base, so how will you tariff somebody? And recall that the idea of a tariff was a temporary punitive measure to get your opponent back to the negotiating table. Today, Trump says he will tariff Canada, for example, while at the same time saying he doesn't need anything that Canada has. So what's the point of a tariff then? And then he says Canada should become the 51st state and then not have to deal with the tariff. It would seem that Trump hasn't understood the purpose of the tariff process in the first place, unless some other agenda is at play here. And that is the case I make in my other video called The U.S. Takes Canada and Greenland, How the World Works, The Truth You Are Not Being Told. Link in the description below. It would seem, though, with the general agreement on tariffs and trade gone, and the political desire to leave globalization behind, that tariffs are now in vogue once again. Can this political ambition be fulfilled, though? Well, let's take a look at the world then and now. In the time of globalization, the world was essentially carved up into sections. Once upon a time, a country would gather resources exercise creativity in the application of those resources, and then manufacture something from that and have a product for export. Other countries would do the same. Globalization converted the world into manageable regions. The manufacturing region, the resource region, the energy region, the shipping region, and the consumer region. It takes time to disassemble all of that and bring everything back under your own tent and thereby become independent again. We must also understand the role of technology in all of this. The world before globalization saw wealthy countries who literally had it all. They had all of these components and the ability to defend themselves and impose themselves on the others. There was no real proliferation of nuclear weapons back then either. And so you could use tariffs to get what you wanted. But can you do that today? A good comparable to tariffs today is called sanctions. The most obvious example of this right now is the West sanctioning Russia over the Ukraine conflict. No matter your view or position on the conflict, the point here is the sanctions. Russia is a huge country geographically. There is literally none to compare. The land area is huge, and it is full of resources and energy. The population size is modest, and they have a high technological ability. They are able to support themselves internally in many ways and have partnerships with the large Chinese economy, who happens to be their physical neighbor. They also have a large capability to defend themselves against physical aggressors. So did the sanctions on Russia work? Depends on your viewpoint, in a sense. For the Russians, sanctions work pretty well so far, as their economy has actually grown where the West said it would shrink. So for the Western viewpoint, sanctions did not really work well at all. So then how do you expect tariffs to work? This idea of tariffing can very easily backfire. Technology is a great equalizer. This cannot be overstated. The poor parts of the world before globalization didn't really have technology. They were not manufacturing anything much and had generally low GDP. They are not backwards anymore and cannot be pushed around by any type of bully stick in the same way as back then. As a matter of fact, these countries are readily joining into a new alliance of their own. This is called BRICS, and it has an active line of applicants looking to join. This is something the West does not really seem to grasp very well. If you start tariffing everybody, then you run the very real risk that they accept your action against them and shrug it off. Under threat of not being allowed to deal with you or have access to your marketplace, they in turn say, okay, we'll deal with each other within our own trading bloc instead. Now, I hate to be Captain Obvious here, but this is how you strengthen your opponent while weakening yourself. The BRICS group is a combination of emerging economies, large economies, small economies, manufacturing economies, and consumer economies, all under one umbrella. What they share in common is the desire to actually get away from the use of the US dollar as the basis of trade. The G7 Western Group is a non-diversified bloc made up of sophisticated economies generated by globalization. So stop and think about all of this for a moment. You honestly don't need much more than a moment to consider all of this. Who has the advantageous position here? The world isn't what it used to be. You have a stale bloc versus a dynamic bloc, and technology has proliferated to all groups and members. The world is not as it once was. All of this sets up for a showdown to see which faction will be the new world order boss. Recall that whoever comes out of World War as the victor sets the terms of the new economy, the rules, and the acceptable currency standard. We've been living under a US-based order since World War II, as they came out ahead as the lead victors. There's another piece in the puzzle today that makes it different than that of the past. and this is the emergence of artificial intelligence. This promises to be a very powerful tool if it can be contained as a tool. If it cannot be contained, then that is another story, and the ending may not be a good one. This is why Mr. Putin said many years ago already that whoever wins the race to AI will control the world. And he was correct. Those in the AI industry say that artificial general intelligence will be achieved this year, 2025. When you mash all of this together, you can only get a future course for humanity that is on a heading for a technocratic world system of surveillance, control of movement, and thought itself, manifesting in economic controls that function in real time from the micro, the individual, to the macro, worldwide in scale, and based upon actions. Because actions can be observed, surveillance, and behaviors manipulated, turning the ability to trade on and off, and thought control as a result. And this doesn't even bring into question bioinsertable nanotechnologies and brain chips and etc. as other means of real-time control of individuals and whole populations in the interest of the system as a whole. So maybe the discussion of tariffs will be short-lived in light of all of this, or perhaps tariffs themselves will be short-lived. One thing is for certain: to go back to tariffs is to go back to a different time, and to do so requires the undoing of the last 40 years of globalization. And that does not happen overnight, and a presidency is only 4 years. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe, as this really helps a small channel. I thank you all so much, and see you again next time.